Good afternoon, friends around the country and around the world that are tuning into this. Thanks for jumping into another Global Immersion webinar. My name is John Huckins. I'm the co-founding director of Global Immersion. We're a peacemaking training organization that is focused on equipping and activating North American followers of Jesus as instruments of peace in our conflicted world. And for us, we understand peacemaking as not just an add-on to our faith, but as an embodied way of life, that ultimately it's a collaboration with God and others in ushering in the world that God is making and that has been made real in light of Jesus' death and resurrection. And so for us as a peacemaking training organization, we're working to build the capacity of Christian churches and universities specifically, and others beyond that scope, to have a set of a theology and a set of practices to engage conflict transformatively. One thing we've found is that conflict with the right kinds of tools can actually be seen as an opportunity for transformation rather than just a problem to fix or to avoid. And so we are committed to those ends. That being said, why are we having a webinar on the human and policy implications of DACA? I would want to open by saying it's part of a larger conversation around migration and movement and this reality of immigrants and immigration. And for us as followers of Jesus, you know, our sacred and centering text is the Christian scriptures, is the Bible. And what's often omitted from many of our conversations, specifically those of us in U.S. America, is the reality that the people of God, as were presented in these scriptures, were largely immigrants. They were the ones, for the majority of the story, who were on the underside of power, on the underside of privilege. They often weren't the ones sitting in the throne rooms and making policy decisions. They were the ones seeking refuge. You begin with Abraham as this father of a migrant family that's seeking a homeland, the promised land. We move into the prophets who are in exile, yearning for a return home. We have Jesus himself, who is moving between Egypt and the Roman-occupied Palestinian land there in the first century, known as the Holy Land. And we often read our story from the seat of power, and when we understand that we are reading a story of those who are on the underside of power, it actually changes everything about not only the historical reality of our faith and the people of God, but it changes the way we begin to encounter and live out that faith in real time and space today. And so another observation when we're thinking through that lens is when the people of God, when the people of Israel were actually in the seats of power and had a homeland, one of the defining marks of faithfulness to their identity and their calling was their ability to welcome the stranger or the alien in their midst, and not only to welcome them, but to make them their own. Again, this was not an add-on to their faith expression, their identity. This was actually central to who they were called to be and how they were invited to interact with their neighbors. So, from a large framing of our Christian story within the Christian scriptures and the biblical narrative, we have to understand that that not only is our story one of immigration, but we are actually called and mandated to care for the strangers in our midst as a central element of our discipleship journey. Now, in relation to DACA, which has obviously been all over the news, specifically in the last few weeks, many of us, it's the first time it's come on our radar. Many others of us have been working on this tirelessly for years. DACA stands for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and Matt Soerens, who's with us today, will unpack the nuance of that. But specific to this webinar, we really think it's time for us to not just hear about those who have DACA, but to hear from them. We've heard all of these policy arguments. We have rhetoric. We have political posturing, right, left, this or that, us and them. And we've spent very little time around the table to actually hear from those who are impacted by our policy. We don't have to agree on our policy, but we have to understand the implications of our policy on real human beings. And that's going to be one of the gifts of this webinar. So for us, organizationally, how we see this is not a partisan conversation. We believe that our faith must inform our citizenship, not the inverse. We are first and foremost citizens of the kingdom of God, and we happen to live in the United States. So how does that inform? How does our faith inform our citizenship? As everyday peacemakers, as we have termed it, we believe we are actually called to see those who we have often been taught not to see. There are people in our neighborhoods, in our cities, on our streets, in our country that we have been taught not to see because they look or they think or they believe or they act differently than we do. Everyday peacemakers see the humanity, the dignity, the image of God in everyone. And those who have received DACA and the undocumented community as a whole are often people that we've chosen not to see. We need to actually immerse into their stories and allow ourselves to be transformed by what we see and what we experience in relationship, which is the gift of having someone like Nohemi on this call who is a DACA recipient herself and who will invite us into that reality. We're called to contend. We're called to ultimately stand in front of any bulldozer that's flattening people. Those that are on the underside of privilege and power, we as everyday peacemakers are called to stand in the way of the individuals or the systems that are broken, that are actually leading to the destruction of our neighbors and friends. So this isn't a game of political rhetoric. These are women and men whose hope and futures and well-being is on the line. This is not another talking point. These are a set of relationships and human beings that are impacted by some of our decisions we make collectively in our society. So in today's webinar, our hope is that this interaction with our panelists, with Nohemi and Matt Soerens, will help us gain a human and a policy perspective on DACA, all the things we've heard swirling around us. We're going to get a bird's eye view into the life and plight of an undocumented person living in the States and the way DACA gave them, Nohemi, an opportunity to flourish. We're gonna give it a 30,000-foot political overlay of DACA and the larger immigration policy and reform conversations. And finally, and this is our work as a peacemaking training organization, we're going to make this tangible. What are the tangible ways you can practice individually and collectively as a church to actually engage this constructively and compassionately moving forward? So before Nohemi and Matt, before I introduce them, a couple housekeeping things to cover. One, you're going to see in the comment section of this call, you're going to see two sections, a comment section and a Q&A section. Here's the distinctive. In the comment section, if you would just jump in there and write your name and where you live, it'd be great to see where people are tuning into this. We have a great turnout of folks that are jumping in both live today and then those who will engage this with the recording when it's sent out. And maybe even toss in, why are you here? Why are you on this call? Why are you listening to these perspectives? The Q&A function is going to be directed directly to our panelists, to Nohemi and to Matt. And so as you're thinking about questions to craft, they shouldn't be leading questions. They should be curious questions. Ask generous, curious questions that actually are constructive and helpful, informative. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. Depending on how things go, we might not be able to get to very many at all, but put them in there and we'll do our very best to either get back to you in written word or bring it up here verbally. The last thing is you can follow along with this conversation online, which I need to share the screen. There we are. This webinar specifically is going to be following the hashtag TGIP webinar. There is my personal Twitter handle. There's Matt Soerens' Twitter. Nohemi is on Facebook, so you can follow her there as well. Otherwise, let's keep this as an ongoing narrative and conversation using that hashtag so we can circle back and share learnings as we go. Okay, I want to jump in now to the conversations with Matt and Nohemi. And so first off, Matt Soerens is not only a friend and mentor of Global Immersion over the years as we've developed our Immigrants Journey initiative here down the border. He has become a partner in mobilizing churches to constructively engage this issue, and he has been doing it for years and years and years. He's the U.S. Director of Church Mobilization for World Relief. He's a co-author with Jenny Yang of Welcoming the Stranger, Justice, Compassion, and Truth in the Immigration Debate from InterVarsity Press. We have that as required reading for anyone that goes on one of our immersion trips down here on the border because it's so helpful and constructive, specifically from a Christian perspective, building this theology for immigration and then tangible understanding of how it impacts our world and our neighbors. Nohemi is a friend and a fellow San Diegan. We met through some mutual friends here, and when I heard her story the first time, I was completely undone. And she opened my eyes to realities I had been taught not to see, and she gave me the gift of her life and perspective. And as the years have gone by, she's now influenced thousands and thousands of Christians who have come across from across the country, who have come and experienced our Immigrants Journey immersion trip and sat with her and learned from her and heard her story. And that's beginning to inform the way they're actually leading and loving across our country in their churches and their universities and organizations. So it's a gift to have both of them here with us. Matt, I want to jump in with you to get us going with a simple question that has a very complex answer. What is DACA, and why should we care about it as Christians? And I can't hear you right now. I don't know if you're on mute still. Cannot. We'll give a minute or two. Everything was working seamlessly a moment ago. I mean, another option is to pull the headphones and see if you go right through the computer. Oh, I'm hearing you.
Now you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Sorry, I don't know. I would have had to but sorry about that all. So if you want to understand DACA, you probably have to go back to about 2001 to a bill that was introduced into Congress by a Republican senator and a Democratic senator, Orrin Hatch of Utah and Dick Durbin of Illinois, who are both still there, called the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act basically was trying to address one part of the challenge of U.S. immigration policy, I think a particularly sympathetic part, which is what should be done with individuals who were brought to the United States as children who are undocumented, either because they were brought across the border illegally or their families overstayed visas. And these young people very typically would be in a situation where they may or may not know what it means to be undocumented or what legal status is. Most 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds don't understand that concept. But often around the time they'd be 16 years old and want to get a driver's license and find out they don't have a social security number, or wanted to get a summer job, or want to start thinking about applying for college and finding out that they're not eligible for any sort of federal financial aid, this reality of being without status would really crash into many of these young people. So the DREAM Act was a proposal that would have basically allowed those young people to earn citizenship over the number of years if they would meet certain requirements, including either attending college or serving in the military. And some version of the DREAM Act has been introduced, usually on a bipartisan basis, basically every Congress since 2001. And it passed the House in 2010, but didn't pass the Senate. It actually passed the Senate as part of a broader immigration bill in 2013, but didn't pass the House. And so in 2017, it's still never become law. And that's sort of the precursor to explaining DACA, because what happened in 2012 is President Obama was understandably, and I think a lot of folks shared his frustration, frustrated that Congress had been unable to pass this legislation, which seemed to have so much broad bipartisan support. So he determined that he could do, and in consulting with a bunch of his attorneys, that he could actually use something that was already within immigration law called Deferred Action to help this category of young people who came to the U.S. before they were 16 years old. Deferred Action is not a new principle in immigration law. It's actually been used in some version or another by every president since President Eisenhower. But it's never been used on such a wide scale as what President Obama did in June of 2012, which with the creation of the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Basically, the idea of DACA, of Deferred Action, is there are roughly 11 million immigrants in the United States who are undocumented, which technically means they're deportable. But no president in the last several decades has realistically conceived that they were going to deport 11 million people. So every administration will create their priorities. So under the Obama administration, it was, though they didn't always stick with this perfectly, but they said their priorities were people with serious criminal issues, people who were recent arrivals. Those were the two primary categories. But with that, having their high priorities, they also had their low priorities, and in fact, their lowest priorities. And they said that would be people who came here before they were 16, who don't have any serious criminal issues, and who are either in school or who have completed high school in the US. Those people would be our lowest priority, and as such, we are going to defer action on their deportation case. And that's where the language comes from. So they opened up this process with deferred action under laws that already existed. Someone can also qualify for work permission, an employment authorization card. That employment authorization card means you can lawfully work in the United States. It gives you access to a social security number, a valid social security number if you didn't already have one. With that, in almost all states, you could go get a driver's license, presuming you can pass that test. And in many ways, it allowed people to live a fairly normal existence in the United States. Now, it's also important to note what DACA isn't. DACA is not permanent legal status. It's not a path to a green card or to citizenship. It was set up as a renewable program every 2 years. But because it was established by the executive branch, it also can be withdrawn by the executive branch. And President Trump pledged during the presidential campaign that he would do so on day one of his administration. He did not do so on day one, and actually we've made it several months into the administration. Once he actually came into being the president, he made a lot of more equivocal statements about the DACA program, that he was going to respond to this with compassion, that he loved dreamers, that everyone was going to be really happy. And dreamers is the term that's sometimes used to apply to these young people because they would have qualified for the DREAM Act. That's where the term comes from. But that kind of brings us up to where we are about 2 weeks ago. I think we'll talk more about what that means. But at this point, the administration announced about 2 weeks ago that they are terminating the DACA program. One other thing I just wanted to add is to be eligible for DACA, I mentioned you had to be 16 years old. You had to come before you're 16 years old. You also had to be present in 2007 when this was put into place in 2012. So you had to be here for more than 5 years. The thought there is they didn't want this to be an incentive for people to come unlawfully right now. You also couldn't have serious criminal issues. You had to meet these educational requirements. So there's actually a number of application requirements. And then you had to pay a fee to apply to be granted DACA status. And then you had to pay again 2 years later to renew it. That's kind of where we are now. Last, do you want me to touch, Sean, on kind of the scriptures and how we think about this as Christians as well? Or
Yeah, can I jump in real quick though on that? There's some common misperceptions about what DACA is and what it isn't. As you just mentioned, it's not a pathway to citizenship. It's basically a temporary. It puts you at the bottom of the list for deportation. It allows you to, as far as I understand, you get a driver's license, you can work, and you're not not a high threat for deportation. There's also arguments that are made, well, that community is taking our resources. Can you talk about some of what DACA recipients actually get in regards to social services, and then what their benefit is economically based on who they are and the way they spend their money and work and beyond that?
Yeah, that's a really great point. DACA does let you work, which is a big deal, and to do so lawfully, but it doesn't really qualify you for much more beyond that, at least in terms of governmental benefits. So you don't get access to federal financial aid. That would help a lot of young people, but that is not part of the DACA program. You can work and pay your way through college if depending how much your earnings are, and you may qualify for private financial aid, or in a couple states there may be some state financial aid available, but not in most states. But at the federal level, you don't get to do a FAFSA form and get federal financial aid. You also don't get public benefits in terms of food stamps or subsidized housing or anything like that are reserved. In fact, most lawful immigrants with green cards don't qualify for most of those benefits, at least for the first 5 years they're in the country. So the benefits are fairly limited, but going from being unable to even work or drive lawfully, it was a huge change for a lot of young people. It allowed them to be able to move forward with a life that had been in some ways on hold in many cases. With that, those young people have used that, just the blessing of being able to work, which is a fairly core, Christian belief. We believe that God created us to work. And they've used that to contribute in all sorts of ways. There was a study that found that a pretty significant percentage of people who had received DACA status had bought a car in the past several years, usually a first car. A number of them had started college. Others had started graduate school. Some had started small businesses. Almost all of them reported higher wages than some of them were working before without authorization, which very much limits the type of work that you might find because it's unlawful and most employers won't hire you. So there's been a lot of economic benefits to that. And even just, I can speak to this personally as an employer. I have a direct colleague who reports to me who we can employ because of her DACA status. It's beyond the humanitarian side of this. It's incredibly frustrating for an employer to hire someone and train them and develop them as an employee, and then be told by the federal government that this person is no longer authorized to work. And I think that's part of why you see a lot of businesses, especially in the tech industry, but I mean a broad set of businesses. The CEO of Walmart came out recently talking about the importance of DACA. Both because it influences people who buy products from them, but also a significant number of the people who work for them. And that's true in the tech industry as well. It's true across the business world. This is a huge issue as well.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Matt. That's really good. Let's move into Nohemi's story, and then Matt, in regards to some of the biblical work that you've done, maybe we can integrate that into our next session, depending on time. I want to introduce you again to Nohemi, who, one of the ways that we are committed to shaping everyday peacemakers is to sit at the feet of people who are often minorities and who are in the majority world. We found that I'm often exposed to perspectives of people that look a lot like me or think a lot like me, but I rarely sit at the feet of people who don't. And Nohemi is someone who's become an instructor and a guide right here on my streets. It has such a different history than I do. And she has given us the gift. Now, it's important to note that someone with DACA is someone that's undocumented, and it takes a lot of trust and vulnerability to share their story. And I want to acknowledge up front, Nohemi, that this is a huge gift that you've given us to be invited into this space. Many of us have never met someone with DACA and certainly haven't heard the stories, and you give us a portal into really the face of God in your eyes as an image bearer yourself. So would you invite us into your story and how that led to where you are now?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nohemi. I'm so stoked to see all of you guys popping up on the chat. It's really exciting to be part of this. It's really exciting to have a welcoming community that is giving us, again, this safe place to be able to freely talk about DACA and freely state that I was brought to the States when I was maybe 5 or 6 and have illegally stayed until now. It's something that's really hard to say out loud still, and it's not exactly something that you can tell just anyone, mostly because everything's kind of crazy right now, as I'm sure you guys have heard in the news, and it's not a safe thing to say out loud. I didn't know of my undocumented status until I turned 15 or 16. I grew up in San Diego. Up until that age, thought that I was born and raised, and have always considered San Diego to be my home and to be my birthplace because I didn't know that I wasn't born here. Again, I was brought here at a very young age and don't have a memory of not being in San Diego. So Chula Vista specifically will forever be my home. I really loved school here. I tried really, really hard, and really just my parents' original idea of bringing us to the States was so that I would be able to have the opportunity to pursue an education. And they always pressured us to go above and beyond in school, and I did. In high school, my sophomore year, I started to take classes from community colleges to be able to build up the units. And by my junior year, I applied to a private art academy in San Francisco, trying to pursue art and photography. I, at that point, already had multiple internships with different nonprofit organizations, have had a lot of volunteer hours, and had a full online portfolio that I sent out to this private art academy. Growing up here, I knew that my family wasn't exactly well off. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and I have 4 younger brothers who are all from here. So I knew that we were poor by, I guess, San Diego standards. I knew that we were going to struggle with sending me away to college. And I knew that something was kind of off in my family, but I wasn't entirely sure what it was. I couldn't pinpoint it because why would I ever think that maybe it had something to do with our legal status? I didn't even understand what that meant, really. So looking back at that now and looking back at my childhood now, it's almost silly to me that I didn't recognize a couple of the signs there, that I was too naive and didn't consider that maybe I just wasn't born here and maybe my family wasn't supposed to be here, because I thought that this was our home and that we belonged here. So I applied for a scholarship, for a full ride scholarship for that art academy, and I got in. And I was super stoked. I could not wait to tell my parents. I hadn't even told them that I applied because I wanted it to be a surprise. I was really stoked about being able to tell them, hey guys, don't worry about me. I'm going to go off to school and it's going to be really great because everything's going to get paid for. And again, no idea that I was undocumented. So I went ahead and applied, got it, came home, and really excited, told my mom and dad, hey, I have news for you guys. And I like still remember my parents' faces when I said that I had news for them, because I think that they sort of knew that that conversation was about to come up. And I sat them down and said, hey, I applied for this art academy in San Francisco. I realized that it's a little bit far away, but I'm really, really stoked to go here. And guess what? I got in, and it's a full ride. Everything's covered. You guys have nothing to worry about. All you guys have to do is send me away in a year and a half or so, and it'll be really great. And my mom sits me down and says, Nohemi, you can't go. And I'm thinking, I'm 15 years old. I'm like, wow, why do my parents hate me? They want me to stay in San Diego forever. And she very delicately tried to explain to me that I wasn't allowed to even accept that scholarship, that I wasn't allowed to say yes to going to my dream school, even though I thought that I had every right to go. And I still managed to not be able to really comprehend that. I didn't understand, mostly again because I, in my mind and heart, thought that I was born and raised San Diegan and that I belonged here, and that why wouldn't I be able to say yes to something that was being given to me because I deserved it. And both my parents were just trying to be so sweet and trying to explain to me that it was completely out of my control and out of their control, but because of a lack of a social security number, I wasn't able to say yes to that. I wasn't able to take that. And so they explained that I could still go to community college and take some classes here and there, but that they were going to be really limited and that I would have to pay for them out of pocket because I didn't have financial aid access and I didn't have the amount of scholarships available to me that I thought originally that I would have. When I started to realize that that's what was happening to me and that all of my options were now limited instead of what I originally thought were going to be endless options for school, I was devastated, and I started to kind of dwindle in high school, mostly because I didn't really see the point. I was like, well, I'm working really hard and I'm having all these internships. I have all these references. I already have some units. I don't understand why all of this is worth nothing now. I will straight up graduate high school and still have nowhere to go. I don't have a future here. Why do they do this to me? And for a while, I was really resentful towards my parents for bringing me here because I didn't understand why they would do that to me. I didn't understand why I would be brought somewhere where I wasn't able to grow, to do anything. Eventually, my dean of students and my teachers started to notice that my grades were starting to suffer and that I was not being outgoing anymore and that I was slacking on school events and just overall not being the student that I had been for 3 years. So they pulled me aside and talked to me and asked me what was happening. They feared that something was happening at home, that I was just going through something rough, and I was, but I didn't actually feel safe enough to be able to tell them, hey guys, I'm undocumented and I don't know what's gonna happen to me. Fortunately, I went to a really, really small high school with teachers that really, really, really cared about me. So at some point I broke down to one of my deans and just explained that I felt like I had no purpose and I felt alone and I couldn't tell anyone, and I was scared when I was telling him, and I felt like such a jerk knowing that my family was in risk now because I was telling this random stranger whom I for a while had trusted and felt safe with, but now all of that safetiness, all of that trust was completely snatched away because I didn't know how this person was going to react to me having to admit that I was confused and lost and anxious and scared for my future. And at the same time, there was no way for me to tell anybody else. So I ended up having to talk to my dean of students about it, and he was super awesome and helped me find some scholarships that were available for me. So I was able to immediately go to community college after high school, but it still wasn't the same thing. My original plan was that if I wasn't admitted into the art academy, that I would go to SCSU or go to UCLA or even Berkeley, because I had the grades for it and I had the motivation, and I really thought that if you worked hard enough for something that you were going to be able to obtain it. And I was told at 16 that it doesn't matter how hard you try, the opportunity is not going to be there for you if you're not born here. And it shaped my life for the next like 4 years, basically. And it was terrible because I wanted to be grateful for at least being able to go to community college, because I know that still some people can't do that outside of America. So I was still kind of grateful, but I couldn't help but be angry and be frustrated and be upset because I still couldn't drive. I still couldn't work. So I was stuck doing random side jobs that I didn't want to do, that I had no passion for, and still had no idea what was going to happen to me after college. And I didn't know where I was going to work, what my life was going to be. And it wasn't like I could just be like, okay, I'll drop everything and move to Mexico and start new. Because again, I grew up here and my culture is here and my home is here. My friends and family are here. I speak Spanish and I could probably make salsa at some point. But other than that, I don't know anything about Mexico at all. And my family that's over there, I'm not very close with, because I, again, am super Americanized and super whitewashed. And I don't fit in with them. And I wouldn't even know where to start if I had decided to go to Mexico instead. So that wasn't an option, though I considered it. It wasn't an option. It was better to stay here and feel non-existent and worthless than go to Mexico and start new and be by myself physically, because at least here I have my family and I have my friends. Eventually, I heard about DACA through school. One of my professors reached out to me and explained that this was happening. At the time when DACA first came out, it wasn't super publicized. The media was kind of saying that it was a terrible thing that was going to happen to the States and that people shouldn't support it, and everyone was being super sketchy about it. And I remember being really scared to apply because I didn't actually know what it was, and there wasn't a whole lot of resources to reach out to be able to understand what I was getting myself into. And I think that was the scariest part of realizing that I was undocumented, realizing that our entire existence here was meaning it meant for us to be hidden. We had to be in the shadows. We had to do all these random little weird things that I didn't realize were strange, because that was my entire childhood. So with that being said, I heard about this project, this bill, this thing that was happening, but I didn't even know who to reach out to, because I didn't know if it was safe enough for me to go to an immigration attorney and say, hey, I'm confused about DACA. What do I do? How do I learn? How do I apply? Should I apply? Eventually I learned some information from my school counselors. They were really awesome. I think that living in San Diego has given me some access to, well, actually has given me a lot of access to resources because we're right next to the border. So there is that safety net here, and I think that's just geographically, but I ended up learning some about it. And so I went home to my parents again and I said, hey, Mom and Dad, I know that you guys said that I wasn't going to be able to do anything ever, but I heard about this thing, and if I apply to it, and if you guys give me a lot of money and you tell the government everything about us, I can maybe stay in the States for like 2 years. And my mom looks at me and she goes, you're crazy. We're not doing that. You're selfish, and why would you want to do that? And I explained to them, Mom, Dad, I get it. I know that this is risky. I get that you're scared. I'm scared, but I don't have a choice. And if I don't do this now, I don't know that I'll have an opportunity to do something near it ever again. So I'm going to do this whether you're with me or not. I have to. And at this point, my parents are like, well, she's never taking a no for an answer, so I guess we'll support you. And I shot a couple weddings and concerts and managed to come up with the money. And I eventually was able to apply. And applying itself is actually really terrifying because you're in lines with people, and then you go into this tiny little office with a bunch of immigration officers and white people in suits, and it's terrifying. You're like, oh, it's a trap. I came here to tell them that I'm here, and now they're taking me away. But everyone turned out to be really nice, and obviously I ended up being able to get DACA, and I've been in the States legally for a couple years now, and I've been working my butt off, having 2 or 3 jobs, and being a full-time student, which is insane. I do not recommend it to anyone. But I also sort of have an expiration date right now, so there's not really a chance for me to slow down and consider being a 23-year-old. I have to make sure that by January 18th of next year, if I'm not approved by that time, especially after that announcement, I'm stuck. I have to make sure that my education's done. I have to make sure that I have money saved up in case like things go wrong. And that is a continuous anxiety I've had for a couple years, ever since I had DACA, which I think I'm on my 5th year now, almost, yeah. And that's crazy. It's crazy that my daily life is to continuously be anxious about my future and not really knowing where it's headed. When I woke up on the Friday after Trump announced that he was getting sued for not backing down on DACA, I woke up to a bunch of text messages and phone calls and emails of people saying, hey, we're really worried about you. Like, just know that we love you, and you're like just trying to reassure me, which was really awesome. And I like really like felt loved and reassured, but I was also like, wow, this many people are really concerned for me and my life. Like, I should also be worried and concerned, and I should be more worried because I'm me, and they're still safe. And whatever happens to me, like, yes, it'll be really sad and tragic, but at the end of the day, like, this is happening to me specifically right now. And not only that, I've worked in the workshops with people that were trying to apply for DACA. I know students that are specifically being affected by that announcement. My phone hadn't stopped ringing that entire week from people that I helped apply for DACA, that I handed that pen to and said, here, this is a safe thing for you to do, because I believed in this. And now they're scared, and now they don't know what they're doing, and I don't have a way to tell them, hey, it's going to be okay, because I don't know that it's going to be okay, and I don't know that they shouldn't be having panic attacks everywhere they go. And it's been a really terrifying month. It's been, since the presidency happened, since November 8th, it's been kind of crazy. I had been waiting for this announcement, really. It was a matter of time, really, for it to happen. And it just happened a little bit faster than I thought it would. And I don't really know where it's headed. So I don't really know where I'm headed. But I'm just hoping that I'll be able to stay here.
Nohemi, thank you for your courage is always inspiring to me. But the way you're able to even call the rest of us to action, and you use the words, I have an expiration date. It's just a reality I can't understand. One of the core some of the core fuel for humanity as a whole is to have a hope for a future. And when your future is completely unknown because of this expiration date, I can't imagine how you navigate through just daily life. And the way that you do that anyway, the way you inspire others, the way you offer workshops for your peers, the way I know sitting with you last week over coffee that you want to leverage this moment in the platform you've been given to support the other 800,000 young women and men in your situation is stunning and a model to the rest of us. And so I know for many of us, we can kind of control our future, and right now you can't. But we, to some degree, can control your future, and why moments like this are so important for us to grow in our understanding and awareness. So thanks for inviting us into that, and we'll circle back to you here in a minute. But I want to go back to you, Matt. Nohemi described this last month and how disorienting it's been for her, and the trauma, which is now there's multiple scientific studies that have come out that actually articulate that that our youth are gaining PTSD out of the fear of their parents being deported or themselves being deported, specifically the immigrant community. Nohemi obviously falls in that group. What's going on now since DACA, since the DACA situation arose and kind of culminated 2 weeks ago? How do we engage? What's some policy reforms that are underway?
Yeah, and again, thank you, Nohemi, for sharing your story. It's so powerful, and it reminds me of the stories of 3 or 4 close friends of mine who are in a very similar situation, and it's what keeps me motivated to keep pressing forward on this. So the announcement was actually 2 weeks ago today. Interestingly, it was Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who is not in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, but going back to when he was a senator, has been a very fierce critic of the DACA program. And I would say, whereas some folks, lots of people support DACA, a few others maybe support the idea of Dreamers getting legal status, but are uncomfortable with the president using executive action to get there. Someone like Attorney General Sessions has been clear, and he made this clear in his announcement. He thinks that these young people should not get the ability to work. He's, without citing evidence, because actually almost all economists would disagree with him, he'll make this argument, well, they're going to take jobs from Americans, or somehow they're a security threat, even though they've all gone through a criminal background check to be granted this status. So it was a particularly painful announcement to watch for what it did, and also just for the way that it was communicated. But what it was basically announced was that the DACA program will be ending. It'll be phased out, so no one lost their DACA on September 5th, 2 weeks ago today. But it's a 6-month process. So beginning March 5th, anyone whose current expiration date on their card, and again, they're valid for 2 years, and then they're renewal. You can renew them. So it'll be a rolling process. But starting in March, about 30,000 people will lose their work permission. And what for most of them that will mean is they will lose their jobs, because most employers abide by U.S. employment laws, and they can't keep someone on the books who is not authorized to work. That will mean they lose their income in most cases. It will mean some will have to drop out of school, some will miss a car payment or a mortgage payment or a rent payment, and the long-term ramifications are far beyond just losing that card. It is important to note, especially if this applies to anyone who's out there listening or knows someone, they did allow that people whose expiration is prior to March 5th can apply for one last 2-year renewal, but they have to have their application in by October 5th, which means I know at World Relief, we're reaching out to all of our clients whom we've helped to get DACA initially or have helped them to renew in the past. We know when their expiration dates are, and we're reaching out to all those individuals to make sure they know that, and we are moving other people out of our appointment calendars to get their applications completed by October 5th, presuming that they want to choose to do so. Now, what it will mean when people lose DACA, they will lose the work permission. They will not be authorized to work. Their social security number is still issued to them and is still valid for non-work-based purposes. So that number will still belong to them and be associated with them, for example, for starting a checking account or a credit card or something like that. The other very significant reality is they will lose protections from deportation. Now, that doesn't mean that those 800,000 people are going to be deported necessarily, and I don't think it's actually likely, but it's fair to presume that some of them will be caught up in some of the raids that ICE is doing and some of the enforcement actions that ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is doing, which increasingly under the new administration have included those who don't have criminal convictions. Under the last administration, at least by the second term, they've gotten fairly good at actually prioritizing those with serious criminal convictions for deportation. Under the new administration, they've broadened their deportation priorities. So some individuals who previously had DACA could be at risk of deportation. And understandably, a lot of those people are very concerned because they have very recently provided their name and address and a whole lot of other personal information, in some cases implicating their families as well, to the Department of Homeland Security in order, on good faith, to apply for the DACA program. So that's the bad news, and it is bad news. There's not a way to sugarcoat that. The good news is it's still possible for Congress to act. And I think that's important to highlight. That DREAM Act that I started by talking about, which hasn't passed since 2001, is been introduced on a bipartisan basis in the House and in the Senate. It's a generous bill that would not just let those who qualify for DACA stay lawfully and work, but it would allow them to eventually earn citizenship. and have a permanent place in this country that they already belong to in every way except for on paper. And there's also been a few other bills that do maybe a little bit less generous. For example, the DREAM Act that's been introduced in the House. You have to arrive before your 18th birthday. There's another bill in the House called the Recognizing America's Children Act, which has a lot more Republican support, but it's good that it has so much Republican support. It would require you to come in before your 16th birthday. And some of the other requirements are a little bit different, but fundamentally, I think they're both positive bills that would be much better than the status quo. The big question is if Congress will act on it. They haven't for 16 years, at least not both the House and the Senate at the same time. But because there is this, in some ways, this cliff that we're going to go off of next March, there's more pressure on Congress to act than I think there has ever been before, because there's never been really a deadline for them to act. And to his credit, although we were very critical of his decision to end the DACA program, President Trump has maybe a little bit ambiguously or a little bit not entirely consistently, but he has said on Twitter and elsewhere that he wants Congress to act to protect those with DACA, which makes it frankly much more likely that it could actually happen. It puts some pressure, especially on members of Congress from his own party, who are actually less popular than the president is with their voters, to say, look, you need to do what the president says and pass the DREAM Act or something like it. That's our hope, and that's where advocacy becomes incredibly important right now.
Matt, on that, there's especially because many of the people listening in here are part of churches or represent churches, pastors of churches, and thinking through not only the individual question right now, like what's my individual mandate right now? What's my collective, my church's mandate and invitation? And, a lot of these issues are so complex, they can be paralyzing. There's also a lot of churches who are saying, we're not going to become political. So this is something that could kind of detonate our congregation. What's your word to them in this moment, specifically from a theological perspective, and then looking at someone like Nohemi in the eye and saying, okay, how do we hold this tension? How do we allow our faith to inform citizenship and lead a church?
Yeah. First I would say there are things that churches can do beyond addressing the legislative issues. Like there will be a whole bunch of students, I got an email from one yesterday, who are facing having to drop out of college because they can't afford tuition. That's something a church could come around one of those students and say, we're going to come up with a scholarship. Now, that's not the political solution. It's a one case-by-case basis, but it would certainly help those individuals, especially where there's a relationship. But I would also argue that we're not loving our neighbors very well if we're not willing to address the systemic problems that are harming them. To paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr., if you're the good Samaritan on the roadway, of course you're going to stop and help the guy beaten up on the side of the road to Jericho. But if the next day someone else is beat up on the side of the road to Jericho, and the next day someone else is beat up on the side of the road to Jericho, at a certain point, to love our neighbor requires us to ask the question, what is wrong with this road? And take that analogy to the situation of DACA and the DREAM Act. I think there's clearly some things that are wrong with this road. The system is a dysfunctional system that is harming people who, many of whom are part of our body as Christians. We're told in 1 Corinthians 12 that if one part of the body suffers, every part suffers with it. And many of these people are part of local churches. They are us. And so I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility to speak up for those who are affected by this. And that's, that might be the pastor writes an op-ed in the local newspaper. It might mean he or she meets with their member of Congress. It might mean they invite everyone in the congregation to make a phone call. I was in a church a week ago where I demonstrated for them. I showed them how easy this is to do on your cell phone. Your member of Congress's phone number should be in your cell phone. It's a great thing to do when you're stuck in traffic. If you call on a weekend, you can leave a message if you're afraid to talk to people. Call during the day, you can talk to a college intern. It's not intimidating. But really to help people understand that the advocacy really makes a difference. My real prayer is that the church would rise up right now. If we can't figure it out around something, frankly, as heartstring pulling as the DREAM Act, there's plenty of other important issues we should be advocating on as well. But this one's an easy one. This is one where literally more than 80% of Americans agree this is what we should do, including roughly that percentage of evangelical Christians and nearly that percentage of both of Republicans and a higher percentage of Democrats. So there's broad bipartisan support at this point as well. But the people who are against it, though they may be 10, 15, 20% of the population, are usually much more vocal. And they call their congressperson over and over and over again. And they mail their bricks to Washington, D.C. to their legislator's office. They're very creative, and we tend to be rather lazy. I think it's really important that we speak up now as a collectively.
Awesome. That's really good. And I know, too, there is power in a collective witness in cities, too. I'm part of a clergy organizing network here in San Diego. In fact, I'll be signing off this call and going straight down to city council after this to stand with clergy who are saying our mandate is to follow Jesus, who welcomes a stranger in this way. And it's not a partisan thing. It's a discipleship thing. And so, but to do that together with other pastors and leaders in your city makes a huge difference. That's really, really helpful, Matt. Nohemi, back to you, and thank you for the questions that are coming in here. There's something that you often share with our groups about the relative and the reality of privilege that many of your peers have who have citizenship. Like you're a go-getter, you're out there moving and shaking, and you don't know what your future is going to be. You have this expiration date. What is your word to those of us who sit more in the side of power and privilege, and even your peers? Like what do we need to do to support you now?
More than anything, I would ask everyone to stay informed and stay aware, because a lot of everything that's happening is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of people don't actually understand how DACA is functioning or going to be functioning. And yes, there is a lot of information missing, but I would encourage you guys to understand what DACA is first before having a stance on it. Just because a lot of people hear about it first and they're just like, oh yeah, that's immigrants being in our country, and then just automatically want to fight it. But not a lot of us had the choice to be here, and not a lot of us have the voice to fight for ourselves. One of the restrictions on DACA is not being able to vote. So as much part of the community as I feel like I am, I don't really get to voice my opinion, and I don't really get to choose who's going to be affecting my life for the next couple of years, because I don't get to vote. I don't get to be able to be part of that conversation. And I would encourage you that if you do have the opportunity and the privilege and the right to vote and to talk to these people leading our country, then you should talk to them, and you should be able to inform yourself and understand the issues that we're facing as a community and as a country, but also be active. Go out there and let them know how you feel, and let them understand that even though something is not directly affecting you because you're not a DACA recipient, understand that it's affecting the community around you. So it is going to affect you, because if all of us get deported, or if all of us have to stop working, it's going to immediately affect the community and city that you're living in. And even if you want to think about it that way, and hey, this is going to affect me one way or another, it just get involved. Just do it. Understand the issue. Understand that it's not something that isn't going to affect you, because it will, and fight it, because that's really everything that we can do right now. I'd encourage you guys to be the voice that the community of immigrants that is living in your country cannot have, and use the rights that you guys are being given, because we don't have those rights right now. And understand that that's a privilege.
Excellent. Thanks so much, my friend. Thank you to both of you for carving out not only this time, but for the life and work and witness you both embody. It's a gift, and we're committed to leaning into this with you. And all those that represent this, that are listening in right now. A couple people have asked if they can share this, and our response to that would be, please do. Like, there's a reason we offer this as a free resource, because we believe this message matters, that when we actually see beyond and below the polarizing stigma and stereotype and rhetoric, we actually see the humanity and dignity and image of God in others. And we actually can have tools that equip us to move in a way that leads to the flourishing of all of our neighbors. And so this is one way to do that. This is a free resource. Pass it far and wide. You're going to be getting a follow-up email. Every person that's registered, whether you're on the live stream right now or you get the recording afterwards, you're going to get a copy of this webinar, along with a series of resources, which I'll outline right now. One, is there any other questions I'm missing right now? I think that's good. We want to ask you to learn, like, grow in your competency around this issue, as Nohemi just invited us into. Matt Soerens has a great interview with Bill Hybels of Willow Creek Community Church We'll be sending you a link to that interview. It's a great starting point to on-ramp in your understanding of immigration and the way we care for our neighbors here, specifically someone like Nohemi in the DACA situation. There's a short 6-minute video that outlines the story of a DACA recipient, a dreamer, that was produced by Alliance San Diego. It's a nonprofit we're partnered with down here that offers legal counsel to immigrants. And it's an excellent way to begin to share the stories of those, again, behind our labels that you can use in your communities. So we're going to learn, we're going to watch. The third, we're going to ask you to be open to an experience. We have created an immigrant's journey immersion trip down here at the border for this very reason. Why? Because we actually believe not only are you going to gain a theology and practice for the work of everyday peacemaking, you're going to get a human understanding of immigration. And when you look into the face of someone you have othered, you will never see them the same way again. It will grow your compassion, and it will lead to action ultimately that'll better reflect the way of Jesus that we have committed to. So if you want to sign up for an immigrant's journey immersion trip, we host them all throughout the year. Go to our website, globalimmerse.org, for more information on that. You can register individually for a trip that's coming up, or you can set up a trip for your church or your school or your organization to do together. You'll meet people like you'll probably will meet Nohemi. You'll also meet others on both sides of the border, whether in deportation shelters in Tijuana or Border Patrol here in San Diego across the board. The fourth thing we'd ask is for you to read. We have our newest book, Amending the Divides, Creative Love in a Conflicted World, that comes out next week on September 26th. So we are asking you to pre-order that, and we're going to have actually a live launch day webinar on the 26th, where we're actually going to interview people like Nohemi, our friends and peacemakers across the world who are living this message out, from the Middle East to the borderlands to our own neighborhoods. So that will be an engaging webinar at 10 a.m. on the 26th, the day our book launches. You can order that on Amazon. The last is to act. And again, this is all going to be in your email, so you don't have to remember all this or write your notes too fast. Let your member of Congress know how concerned you are for the future of your neighbors with DACA. Let them know that you're taking seriously Nohemi's invitation for us to leverage our privilege and influence for the sake of her flourishing and the 800,000 others in her situation. And so Matt has gotten us connected with some really tangible resources for how to do this. So that'll be in the follow-up email as well. So pay attention to that. It'll come into your inboxes tomorrow. And ask the question, how does this become tangible for me individually and for my community? So if you need to set up a learning party where you take this webinar and you need these resources, and you spend another night this week going through this together and saying, how are we going to leverage our collective strength as a church or a school or an organization, do that. I'll close by saying this brief anecdote. We were sitting with our friend Alberto, who is the executive director of Casa del Migrante, House of the Migrant in Tijuana, which Matt has been to with us a couple years ago. And we were sitting with this collective of primarily church and denominational leaders from around the country who came down to see and experience the human reality of immigration. And so we're with this Mexican leader, Alberto, and we asked the question, why should we as Christians, as followers of Jesus, care about this? Like, what is our call and our mandate? And he is such a wise sage. He wasn't rattled at all by the context or the question or the audience. He just said, and this I quote, he says, Jesus was very clear. We are to care for the orphans, the widows, and the strangers, the immigrant. It was true then, and it's still true today. We have a lot of work to do to stay faithful to what Jesus asked us to do. He's giving his life to that in Tijuana. Nohemi and Matthew are giving their lives towards those ends here in the States. We are all invited to care for the orphans, the widows, the strangers in this situation who have this DACA status, and in the undocumented community as a whole here in our country. So God, may you invite us into a life where we actually leverage our privilege and our influence for the sake of those who need healing, who are on the underside of power and are being hurt by both individuals and by systems. And may we be the answer to our prayers in the form of our tangible practices and actions as everyday peacemakers in our conflicted world. To those ends, amen. God go with you. Thank you all for joining in.